All right, welcome back, everybody. We are doing a real estate myth busting series here. And the first myth we are taking on today is one that we get asked about all the time and that people say all the time as if it's gospel. And that is that buying a fixer upper is always better than buying a turnkey property or buy the ugliest house in the best neighborhood. Is there some wisdom in some of this advice? Yes, but not for everybody. This, like anything in real estate, it's hyper local and it's hyper personal. And I actually think for the vast majority of people, this is not good advice. And we're going to go over why so you can make an informed decision for yourself. By the end of this episode, you should know whether you're the type of person who should consider a fixer upper or if you should buy a house where you can put the furniture down and get on with your life. Welcome back to the Informed Homebuyer Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Rich Curtis, and I have with me my co-host, Dave Miller. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing well, Rich. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we are getting into it. We hear this one all the time, and people are always hitting you. We even had a client just recently hit you up asking you about a renovation loan, which we'll get into that aspect of it to sort of take on a fixer upper. But the basis, the financial basis of this advice is reasonably sound. Buy an ugly house that needs repairs in a bad neighborhood. I mean, a good neighborhood, pardon me. By having in a good neighborhood, you have sort of the sky is the limit for how much money you can put into that house and still sort of be okay. If you've got wildly expensive houses in the neighborhood, you can do a pretty extensive remodel and still get your money back out. If you're the kind of person who's handy and can handle that sort of thing, you can make some money there, but it really isn't for everyone. And the first issue is I think people don't really think through, Dave, where am I going to get the money to do the repairs? If I'm buying this house on a loan, if I'm not a super well capitalized buyer, I don't have a ton of cash around, how am I going to get that money? Where's that going to come from?
Right. And it's oftentimes substantial amounts of money. And that's just typically with the things that you can see, not including the things you can't see. And so we talk about an ugly house in a nice neighborhood, that sometimes is going to be a lot of exterior maintenance, a lot of landscaping, paint, carpet, things like that. But the other thing that usually goes along with an ugly house, or things that are, sitting there for a while that haven't been had any love, are the mechanicals and roofs and big ticket items. So if you're not versed in doing that stuff, then it can be way more than you anticipate.
Yeah, and I think people don't. One, I think they don't take all of the costs involved, and two, they don't think about how they're going to finance that. So if you're buying a home with a loan, and if you've watched our other podcasts, you've seen, about the minimum you're going to do down. There are some 0% down programs and some VA loans and things like that, but for the most part, the minimum you're going to put down is about 3%. And then you have your 3% in closing costs. And so all up, you're going to have about 6% into this house. So if you take our, hypothetical, we usually use a $500,000 house because that's around the median for a lot of our areas, and it makes the math easy, frankly. You're looking at $30,000 for 6% that you need to put into that house. How many of you watching the show are sitting there with another $65, $70, $100,000 in cash over and above that to come in and do the remodel work? And I think people think through the interior stuff, but they're not thinking as much of, well, it needs a new roof. And do I want to put a new $40,000 kitchen under a roof that's going to leak in 2 years? Or it's got an old sketchy Zinsco electrical panel. And do I want to do a $100,000 remodel and have it all burned down because I didn't do a $5,000 electrical panel? So there's things like that that people don't take into consideration. We do have some techniques to help with that. So Dave, maybe let's start off with talking them through, a credit to closing costs and how that can save them at least some capital. They're probably not a full remodel worth of capital because, on our hypothetical, we're only talking, $15,000 there, but some capital.
Yeah, and I think Rich, you bring up a really good point, and you just kick this off with this is hyper personal as well when you're buying a house that maybe needs some work done to it, and what's your skill set, how much money do you need. And so if you're buying a home and you're putting, you're putting your initial plans to put 20% down, I always have the conversation. You found the house you like, you love it, you're putting 20% down plus closing costs. Well, what does that leave you? And after you've previewed this home, you looked at it, what are the things you need to do or want to do in the short term? How much is that going to cost you, and how long is it going to take for you to get that amount of equity together to do those things? And so, you mentioned closing costs. Closing costs can be, 2 or 3%. If we say a $500,000 purchase price, 2 to 3% could be $10,000 to $15,000 based depending on when you buy, in terms of, in the property tax cycle, but $10,000 to $15,000 is a lot of money. Now, if you get a seller credit to offset a lot of that, now maybe you've kept $10,000 or $15,000 to do some things that you need to do. And there's also a difference between the need to do and want to do. Um,
Yeah, and I think it's hard sometimes for buyers, especially first-time buyers, to prioritize the need to do over the have to do, and we kind of get into that. You want the pretty kitchen, but you need the roof and the electrical panel, and that if you have a limited pot of funds, there can be some poor decision making that happens there sometimes.
yeah,
You know,
100%. And there's this vast range. And I think it's, mentioned on this podcast. I've bought and sold, I flipped a lot of houses. And years ago, when flipping kind of became popular after the financial crisis, buyers didn't want to buy a flipped house because they felt like, well, there was a couple things. Is there was flippers out there that did shoddy work, and there was a reputation that, okay, I'm buying something that's been flipped and the quality's not very good. That's not always the case. And the other part of that is mentally someone saying, well, the person that's selling me this house flipped it. They bought it for 300,000. Now they're selling it for 450. I wanted to buy it for 300,000. Well, you
yeah,
don't have the means to do that. And that flipper probably bought the house well under market value. And there were some things really wrong with that house that they went in and they fixed. And that could have been things that you never saw. That could have been things like dry rot and pest repair. And like you said, Rich, new electrical, new plumbing, upgrades that would just cost an exponential amount of money. And that not every regular traditional home buyer has the wherewithal to do that kind of stuff.
yeah, and it's a good point. I think too, people don't they don't take into consideration the fact that there could have been condition issues with that $300,000 house that make it unable to actually get a loan and unfinanceable in traditional financing. So that flipper went and either got hard money or had the cash to do it themselves, and it was essentially a cash purchase. Even if there was a loan behind it, it was a non-traditional hard money loan that you may not have access to, or that you would not be willing to spend the money on because they're expensive loans, or that a hard money person might not give you because they want a short term good profit on that, and they don't necessarily know that you have the skills to do this. They've maybe done 5 loans for this flipper and saw that they're going to get their money out and it's going to work, but you as a one-off homeowner, they're not giving you that money. So some of these things you literally couldn't have purchased at that price the way that flipper did.
Yeah, and oftentimes, Rich, the flipper, or the buyer that did the buyer becoming the seller that did the renovation had access to tradespeople that they've given a lot of work, and they get really what we call wholesale prices on that
Yeah.
work versus retail prices. So you as a consumer, unless you can do everything yourself, I mean, you have an electrician or a plumber, carpenter, or anyone come out, you're going to pay retail.
Yeah.
Versus the flippers that are giving these folks, these contractors, a lot of work. They are paying wholesale, and they're often bulk buying the material, and so they are getting a better deal on that trades work. And so you as the buyer, you end up benefiting in some of that. Yeah, the flipper or the sellers made some profit off the renovations, but you as the buyer, you can finance those renovations because if that house was flipped and you're only putting 5% down on a $500,000 house, you're putting $25,000 down. Well, $100,000 of work might have already been done for you. And so I've seen over time, that people or buyers actually sought out homes that had been renovated or flipped because they've been educated to the point they realize that it's a large capital outflow if you want to buy a house and do a lot of renovations yourself.
Yeah, and that sort of wholesale pricing and economies of scale concept, I think your average buyer on the street just doesn't get. If you go to a contractor as a buyer and you're like, well, I can do the flooring, but I want to pay you to do the kitchen. Well, you're paying full freight retail prices for that kitchen. But I'm in the middle of an unintentional flip right now. Basically, a family member passed away. Unfortunately, we're having to just bring the home up to standard to be able to sell it, and we're doing the whole enchilada. So when we brought in the contractor, and all of a sudden you're doing every electrical outlet, you're doing every handle in the house, you're doing all the cabinets, you're doing all the flooring, doing all the interior, exterior paint, you're doing a big job. All of a sudden that price starts to come down because there's a lot more margin in it for that guy who's getting a piece of everything you're doing versus just the kitchen. And when you're trying to DIY stuff and do the elbow grease move, you're only bringing that contractor little individual pieces of the job, and necessarily for him to have the margins to feed his family, that's got to be full freight fees. And so that flipper is able to pass on some of that discount to you, even though they are making a profit on it. Even accounting for their profit, you're still bringing in this overall home at a quality and a price that is probably less than most average people could have done for on their own.
Yeah, yeah, you bring up a really good point, Rich. And I think the other part of that too is when you're previewing a home, and I've recently previewed homes. I was just with some friends that were excited about looking at a house. This was in Southern California, and we just were walking through, and it was a flipped home. And instantly, with someone with my experience, I was able to see, okay, this was not well done.
Yeah.
This it looked beautiful when you walked in, and the people that we were with, my friends that we were with, they thought, "Oh, this thing is amazing. I gotta have this. I wanna have this house." And within 5 minutes, I could see, cabinets were skewed, like the floor was sloping, like there was a lot of issues going on, which you can't necessarily see under that, just the bright, fancy new paint and floor coverings and cabinets. So,
Yeah.
point is working with someone like yourself, Rich, and you go tour a house with a client, you're going to be real with them, and they may walk in and say, "Oh, I love this, I love that," and you might be able to be, we use the term, "Oh, well, it could be just lipstick on a pig," and
Yeah.
that just not quality work. But that's not always the case. There's a lot of times there's quality work that's been done that as a buyer you get to take advantage of, and finance basically because the work's already been done. So you're just putting your down payment money, and you don't have to have this big capital outlay for a new roof or mechanicals or things of that nature.
Yeah, and to do like on the cheap to do a reasonably full flip on nearly any house. I mean, you're going to be 60, 70 grand into this thing, minimum for the most part. And that's doing things, that's painting cabinets and refinishing countertops. That's not new cabinets, new kitchen, this sort of thing. And the average buyer's not sitting around with that kind of money. Now, like Dave said, you can get credit to closing costs that might save you 15,000. If you're 20% down buyer, like Dave's example, then well, maybe we have a conversation about being a 10% down buyer, and you might eat some MI insurance, but you just saved yourself another 10%, another 50 grand that you can put into the remodel. So between shaving your down payment down 10% and getting a credit to closing costs, maybe get yourself 65,000 for a renovation if you have the money. But if you can't do all that work yourself and you're not doing the full flip, you're not able to get those wholesale rates and you're paying a contractor, you're still going to find that 65 grand doesn't go nearly as far as you think. Um, what's that, Dave?
Yeah, and I think to that point, what folks got to understand is when you put less money down, maybe you were going to put 20% down or 15 or 10%. As you start to put less money down, your interest rate really isn't more. You're not paying more. The reason why you're paying more is you're just borrowing more. But if you're getting we'll just say an interest rate in the low to mid sixes, that's a heck of a lot cheaper than you're going to get money for after you purchase the home, and you want to go get a personal loan or you want to get a home equity loan, if you can even do that, if there's probably not enough equity there. But it's really not more expensive to put less money down. And when people start comparing, okay, well, mortgage insurance really isn't that expensive. In fact, we're working with buyers now that initially, oh, we're putting 20% down no matter what. And that tune has shifted even when the work that they want to do on some houses that they're looking at doesn't need major work. They still want to preserve their cash, and they understand that they can, make that home a lot nicer with some of that money that they're preserving, and it's not costing them that much more at all.
Yeah, although I think the hidden costs that people don't factor in when they're thinking about flipping these things is, so if Dave flips with hard money, he's got a reasonably set cost that he's going to pay for that money, and he can factor that into his budget because he's not carrying this house for 10 years, But if you are decreasing your down payment to basically you're financing these fix ups to your, so if your loan is 6%, you've just financed, it's like you borrowed 50 grand at 6% to fix your house. So when you're looking at, well, now I'm going to make so much more when I sell it, well, you have to account for when are you going to sell it? You can sell it 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. Well, you have to account for 5 to 10 years of that 6% interest on that extra money off of the profit you think you're going to get, right? Versus, when you are doing it with cash on hand that you have saved up, then it's really pure profit at that point. There's not a financing component. So, and also when you flip a house, Dave's flipping it and selling it. There is no period of time in which he has to continue to maintain this property. But if you buy a house, fix it up, and live in it for 5 to 10 years, you're also degrading those finishes. When it comes to 5 or 10 years down the road, you have to kind of flip it again or spruce it back up. And so that's going to also reduce your overall profit versus just buying a turnkey home from the get go, putting the furniture down and getting on with your life. So the profit margins when you're not a flipper, when you're not purchasing that property specifically to turn it, but holding it more long term, the math gets a little muddier and more complicated in terms of how much pure profit you're getting out of that. The flip side is you're getting the enjoyment out of living in it and getting to enjoy it for a period of time, but the
Yeah,
profit
yeah.
isn't pure.
Right, and you bring up a really good point, Rich, and I would just use, 50,000 probably is gonna cost you between the extra money that you're financing that you didn't put down, 350 with mortgage terms, probably 350 to $400 a month, somewhere in that range. That extra 50,000, but if you weren't to do that and weren't to finance it, how long is it gonna take you
To
to
save it.
accrue that
Yeah.
save and then write a check for some things to get done? It's going to take you quite a while. So, we find a lot of folks, they have good intentions, but you might live in that house 2 3 years before you can accumulate enough cash to do the things you want to do. And at $300 a month, which is really fixed, it's if you're doing a 30-year fix and you got mortgage insurance, that's not going up, that's not going to change. So you typically is a good opportunity to evaluate and see if that makes sense before you close on that purchase transaction. And those are conversations we're certainly going to have, and those are going to change based on the quality of house that a buyer goes and looks at.
Yeah, and the timelines and everything involved. Yeah. But
Yes.
other than having cash, reducing your down payment and getting credit for closing costs, the only other way really to finance these things is with these renovation loans. And that we could do like a whole podcast on that. So I don't want to go too deep into the weeds, but just we had a client ask recently about a 203K rehab loan. Dave and I
Yes.
have done them before. They are, to put it bluntly, an absolute nightmare. And there's some significant challenges with them. First off, being that from my perspective as a realtor, we have to tell the bank what the house is worth in its current condition. You, as the buyer, have to bring in a set of bids that show what it's going to cost you to fix it up, and then I have to justify to the bank that it'll be worth more than that, or at least equal to that when the thing's done. That's just right off the bat. But also, Dave, you when you did your flips, you did some work yourself. There were some things that you're like, I can do that, so I'm going to do it and save some
Sure.
money. Talk us through what the bank's requirements are in terms of who gets to do the work and who the bank will write a check to on a rehab
Yeah.
loan. Because I
Yeah.
think
This
people
is
don't get that.
No, this is going to be a licensed contractor that's, insured and has provided a formal bid, and you pay
And a
for that.
bond.
Yeah, bonded, and there's oftentimes a general contractor, then maybe some subcontractors. In those renovation loans, there's some limitations on what can be done, and there's different types of them. There's some that could be full blown, where you could have structural renovations, and that's a whole other can of worms. And there's some renovations that are light renovations that might include some fixer upper type things and some mechanicals, but no walls, no, really nothing done to the structure. So, but either way, these are not easy to get. The seller's got to be willing to participate because it takes a while. You have to identify the house, you have to get the contractor to come out and bid it, you have to get maybe multiple bids, and a seller's not going to want to wait for most buyers to go through that process. And we're just not
Yeah.
in that market.
Yeah, and the challenge is that typically will only write a check to the general, the licensed
Yes.
bonded general. So when you're envisioning your flip and you're envisioning your 203K loan, you're thinking, okay, the bank's going to write me a check for 100 grand for this remodel.
Yeah.
That'll go a long way because I'll do the flooring myself and all this shit. No,
Yeah.
they're going to write a contractor a check, and you're going to get half the work you think you're going to get done for that
Right.
100 grand because it's all got to go through. Even on the last one I did, which granted was a few years ago, things could have changed. They
Mhm.
wouldn't even write subs checks. They would
Right.
only write the general check, and he had to farm out the cash to the subs. And by the way, it's also not, here's a check for 100 grand, knock yourself out. It's progress payments. The
Yes.
sub has to, or the general has to say, I've got a sub coming out to do the roof and the electrical tomorrow. I need 30 grand for the roof and 10 grand for the electrical. That's all the bank's going to give him until he submits another bid or a receipt for purchasing things. And sometimes the contractor has to float material purchases to then backfill and submit to the bank for progress payments. And so it's a very complicated pain in the butt kind of thing that for the most part just doesn't work for most buyers in my
Right.
experience.
Yeah, you're right, and they sound great. They're really good loans, and I think in some markets, not in our markets, they work out okay. We're
Yeah.
just not in one of those markets that really supports those types of loans. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years and only done very few of them. I think you and I have done one full one together,
Yeah.
over that lifespan. But we've had a lot of people inquire about them, and I'm always open-minded and say, "Hey, let's explore this." But very clearly, it becomes evident that it becomes more expensive than you anticipate, and it's a real, process and involved process.
Yeah. So right off the bat, guys, just the first hurdle to buying a fixer-upper versus a turnkey property is how the heck are you going to finance this, and what's it going to cost you to finance it? How long is it going to take, and how much work are you going to be able to get done for the money that you have available? Now, if you clear that hurdle, we also have a lot of people, and I have toured a lot of their houses who think they're handier than they are. So, I mean, we call it my brother, my older brother is a home inspector, and we call it homeowner Hank. We go into a house and we look, and you can see all the shiplap on the ceiling doesn't line up, and there's no baseboard, and the floor laminate flooring's gapping, and if you kick one of the boards, you can move it. All this kind of stuff that we see. The tile works the worst. If you have any level of OCD like me and you go into a shower that a homeowner did and you're seeing the grout seams look like an MC Escher portrait. I mean, we have just seen a lot of really terrible homeowner work. So the next hurdle is really sitting down and being real with yourself about how handy you are. If you have not worked in the trades, if you didn't have family in the trades, you didn't grow up in the trades, you've not done significant work yourself, you're not a skilled person with the tools, then one, it's going to cost you more than you think. Two, it's going to take you twice as long or three times as long as you think. And three, you're not going to get the money out on the other side because the work won't be that quality. People like me will walk through with buyers and be like, that's garbage. You don't want to buy this. Because if the tile work looked crappy, what is under the tile? Or who did the hot mop on that shower? What is there a bigger problem, right? Just the surface level. If the finish work looks crappy, it's not likely to get better as you dig deeper. And that's something that if they have a skilled realtor or a skilled home inspector on their side, people are going to tell, and you're not going to get the money out. So I think you got to be real with yourself. Are you the person who has worked in the trades and has skills, or are you the person who spent way too much time watching HGTV at 2 a.m? If you're number two, fixer upper is not for you. Don't do this to yourself and your family. It's not going to go like you think.
Right. And I think it's also important that, when if you represent a buyer rich, you got a contingency period, you got timelines, and you can, as a buyer, you can get into contract on a house, or even be writing offers, and then schedule a contractor to come out and tell you what something's going to cost. And
Yep.
that could be a pretty wide range. And we go through the normal inspections, but oftentimes, and you can get a contractor or a referral to a contractor, and there's no cost for that contractor to come out and give you a bid, but it gives you a general idea ahead of time, what needs to be done here. And then you could decide, okay, how much of this do I want to finance ahead of time? And do I want to change either a seller credit towards buyer's closing costs? Do I want to put less money down
Yeah.
now that I know what this is going to cost? And then also being real with yourself. There are some things you might be able to do yourself. You might be able to put the handles on the cabinets, but be careful when you drill, like measure twice, drill once. But I think that's important to get that information. Maybe you want to get granite countertops, or you could get those bids before you close, and then you can make some adjustments to the financing oftentimes, so that that you have enough to get that stuff done in a timely manner.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this comes down to the type of person you are. If it's a real big fixer upper, do you want a remodel? The first house I was in contract to buy, I think I've told this story in some other videos, but it was in the Meter Road neighborhood of Cameron Park, or Shingle Springs technically, but Shingle Springs, Cameron Park. Yeah, at the time, this was 20 years ago, 600 to $800,000 homes down there. These are million plus homes now. This home was 300,000 or sub 300,000 in that neighborhood on an acre of land. Ton of upside. Had I fixed this home up, there would have been an absolute ton of upside. Now, there were some extenuating circumstances that I won't get into that also pushed me away from this home. But the big thing that pushed me away was my father-in-law, who was a realtor and a general contractor. I had him come down to evaluate the property with me. He said, "You're 100% right. If you fix this up, you're going to make a ton of money on this property. This is a great investment." And then he looked me right in the eyes and said, "But you should not buy this house." And I'm like, "What the hell?" "Well, you just told me I picked right. I'm doing it right. I'm fresh in the real estate business. Look at me with all my knowledge. I nailed this one. Why shouldn't I buy this house?" And he said, "On the weekends, you want to be out rock climbing and rafting and hiking and snowboarding and playing. You don't want to work on your house every weekend. I love working on my house every weekend. This would be a great pickup for me. This isn't going to match your lifestyle. This is going to eat your life. You're not going to be able to do the things you enjoy because you're spending every weekend trying to fix this up just to make a profit down the road. It's not the life you want. Don't buy this house," which was incredibly good advice. Some of the best real estate advice I've ever received. And in a general way, I'd like to present that to our listeners, which is just be real about the life you want. If the life you want, when you really do this bootstrap it, elbow grease it, homeowner hank it, this isn't something that you do in a month. When you do it in a month, you bring in teams of contractors to bang this out. If you're doing it yourself, this is months and months, if not years worth of projects. And is that the life you want? Those decisions are above my pay grade and Dave's pay grade, but I'd encourage you to at least consider that before choosing the fixer upper. And it's why I think fixer uppers aren't for everyone.
Right. Yep, and it's okay, to buy a house that work's been done and realizing that someone, has already bared the cost to do that. And that doesn't mean that you are, getting the short end of the stick because the work's been done. And so, I think that's real, and there might be some things that you want to do yourself and you are capable of doing. There's a certain skill set that you have, and you look for those, in those houses. What is it that you realistically can do? And like you said, Rich, be realistic with yourself and your timelines.
Yeah. And I want to go over one more issue that comes with flipping and then kind of switch to talking about the pros of buying a turnkey house and why I think that is actually for the vast majority of people better. And we'll see if Dave agrees with me. But cost. So there's two things. I'm going to talk about the increase in cost since COVID, and then I want Dave to talk to project creep a little bit. So in terms of increased cost, during the pandemic, the cost of labor just rose dramatically. We saw, depending on where you live in the country, between a 34 and a 46% increase in construction costs and what it costs to get stuff done. So I think some people still have their, budgets rooted in a pre-pandemic world. And when they decide to buy this fixer upper and then go and close on it and then go get some bids, it really blows their hair back what stuff actually costs now. I'm talking a 1,200 square foot roof, $25,000 now. That would have been an $8,000 roof pre-pandemic. I mean,
Yes.
some of these costs have risen just insanely. So, and then we've seen another 4 to 6% hike due to tariffs. So on the high end, depending on what construction you're getting done, where you could see as much as a 50% increase in the cost of getting that done from 2020 to now, which is serious. That's, I mean, a 50% increase in your cost absolutely nukes a remodel budget. So that's a big deal. But that's not the only thing that costs you more. No project ever comes in on time or on budget. Dave, you've done a lot of deals. So can you
Yep.
talk to project creep and maybe tell some stories about some things that caused some creep on some of your jobs? And what is
Well,
project creep for people who don't know what that is?
yeah, project creep is when the projected cost, the estimated cost, get exceeded, and that happens oftentimes very quickly. And that could be things where, you know, on the surface, it's pretty, obvious when you are getting material quote. Maybe you're getting, a price for some new wood flooring or some tile. You're going to do that, but then all of a sudden, you take out the existing floor, and the subfloor has issues, and maybe those issues were not visible from the crawl space if there was one from the home inspection. And then next thing you know, and if you watch those shows on HGTV, some of the flip shows, there's always hidden items that you don't foresee. And so, you could even budget in, a percentage for those things, anticipating them. But I recommend you double that budget, for the unforeseen. And so, and even things like, which is crazy, Rich, we've worked on a lot of projects together, and, folks that have bought homes that have a deck, and even a moderate sized deck You think as just a homeowner, well, I could replace these few boards are bad or this or that, but if the useful life of that deck might only be a short amount of time, price out that material. It's a fortune. Way more than you think it is. And since the pandemic, those costs have almost doubled. And sometimes it's more expensive to start piecemealing things together instead of just ripping it out and doing it right from the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think on my father's house, we had a bad shower valve that it was just you had to be a gorilla to pull or push this thing on. So I had the contractor open it up, and it was a rusty shower valve, and we had to replace the valve. Well, it was an old kind of valve, and the old hardware doesn't fit on the new valves. So now you're
Yep.
buying new shower hardware. Well, now the new shower hardware is matte black, which matches the new sink, which is matte black, but the shower surround is all brushed nickel. So now do you spend the extra $900 on a matte black shower surround so it all ties together and is cohesive on your project? And so very easily in the matter of 3 hours my bathroom remodel went up $1,300, like
Right.
that. And so
Yeah, and
that
that's if
stuff
you
just
can.
happens.
Yeah, and that's if you could access the hardware from the existing openings. I mean, sometimes you'll have a shower that backs up to something. Maybe you're lucky, and I've seen that where the back of the shower is inside of a closet, and you could just open up the sheetrock and replace the hardware that way, or the
That's how we got
plumbing.
lucky. Yeah.
Okay. Right. And so that's nice, but that's not always the case. You're obviously or oftentimes creating more work just to solve one problem by, cutting holes, and now you got to fix it. And granted, it's sheetrock and paint and texture, but it adds up, and it
Yeah,
adds
but
up
if you had
quick.
to go through from the tile side, now you've busted out some tiles, a few of them break, you can't match the tile. Now you're going to redo the whole shower
Yeah.
surround. And
Yeah.
then you're like, well, it's a 46-year-old shower pan.
Yes.
Probably don't want to put a new shower on that. So now I'm ripping the pan out, hot mopping, putting a new pan in, and I've just eaten 3,500, 5,000 for a shower remodel, you
Project
know?
creep. Yes.
Yeah.
It
So
happens.
it happens quick. And your average homeowner who hasn't done a bunch of projects don't think of it that way. And so I think that's another important thing to factor in is even if you're real good and in your 17-day contingency period, you get a bunch of bids and the numbers are tight. But if the numbers are tight and you have that budget and that's it, that's going to be a problem because it's always
Right.
going to go up. It's never going down.
Yeah. And again, revisiting that's the time to determine on your financing if you need extra money. How are you going to do that? And are the
Yeah.
things that you want to do, can you peel some of those off of your list and just wait a bit to do those? Um,
Yeah. And what often happens, I think, too, with homeowner jobs is they end up not getting what they wanted because they find out there's a hidden dragon somewhere that costs them 10, 15, 20 grand. And all of a sudden, well, 20 grand, now you got to drop a whole bathroom remodel off of this thing or two bathroom remodels off of this thing. And so now you only got your kitchen and your flooring. You didn't get your bathrooms because you had to repair the subfloor of the roof or you had a structural thing pop up or you don't know what you're doing. You started knocking down walls that then deflected, beams and trusses and, things happen. So, project creep is something you need to have an overage, 10, 15. I mean, I think in commercial construction, they'll go as high as like a 20%
right.
overage on every bid to account for project creep.
Right. And that project creep also entails usually putting a overage on your cost of materials as well. So those are
Yeah.
you got to prepare for those, and then on top of that, that project creep for those unforeseen items because they will pop up. Um,
Yeah.
to what degree you don't know, but they will pop up.
Yeah, and so that's all the things that you I mean, and we're quite a ways into the pod right now. All the things that you need to consider before really deciding whether a fixer upper is right for you. But here's some reasons you might want to jump into a turnkey property. Dave and I see a lot of appraisals on homes. And appraisal value and market value is different, but there are a lot of items that are included in homes that are incredibly expensive to put in, and you don't ever see that money again. First off, the biggest offender is swimming pools. You'd be hard pressed to put a swimming pool in for, I mean, an in-ground real swim, not an above ground, not a liner pool, but a real in-ground, swimming pool for less than 120 grand these days. And even the nicest pool on the planet, I've never seen someone get more than maybe 30, 35,000, but on average, it's more like 25,000 on an appraisal for a pool. Have you seen a pool come in higher than that?
Uh, no, it's no. You mean for the an appraiser being able to add additional value?
Yeah, the adjustment on the appraisal for the
The
pool.
adjustment, no, it's usually going to be 25% of the cost of that pool, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So if you want a swimming pool, and if and you're looking at, oh, I'm going to buy this house, and we're going to do this, and we're going to add a pool, you're going to add a pool for 120 grand, or you can buy it off some other guy who ate the 120 grand and you get it for 25 grand essentially. That's a big, big deal. Solar is another one of those things where,
yeah,
regardless of how great it is, maybe you pay 60, 80 grand to put it in. Maybe with all your subsidies, you got down to 25 or 30 grand. I've never seen anybody get more than 25 grand for a solar array on
right,
an appraisal. And so you're almost always, and this is owned solar. The leases, that's all a bunch of garbage. We should probably someday do a podcast on why you
yeah,
shouldn't lease solar in real on a home. But owned solar, you're going to always do better if you buy it off somebody. If it has backup batteries, holy crud, you're going to do way better. A full house Generac system that someone put in 12 grand for, they're not getting 12 grand back for that generator, automatic generator system. So these are things that when you buy a turnkey home, you're getting a lot of things at a discount by doing so.
right. You know, Rich, you bring up, you know, and I've been in my home 20 years and I need some window work done. And I had a guy come in, and I maybe told you the story, and he was very pleased with the quality of material for his windows, and it was 5x of what I anticipated it was going to be. And he sat across from me, and not knowing what I did for a living, and sat and told me that the new windows, and if I went with his windows, would increase uh, the value of my house by $80,000. And I had to break it to him. I'm sorry, buddy, that's not the way it works. I live in a tract neighborhood, and I might have these beautiful, nice windows. I might get a little bit more value, but an appraiser can't give me $80,000 more in value than the model match house that's, four houses down. It just doesn't work that way.
I
So,
can't get $80,000 off an appraiser for a darn ADU, like a full second unit in the back. A
right.
granny flat, I have trouble squeezing 80 windows. This guy's off his
Yeah.
head. Uh,
So I get it. Windows are expensive and they're big ticket items. And so when I was buying and selling houses, and I'd walk into a house to see that I can get a good deal on it, the three things I looked at were the roof, the HVAC, and the windows. Those were all very expensive, and those were going to affect the purchasing price. And I could oftentimes pay a little bit more for the house if some of that stuff had been done. Um, which was always a nice bonus. And if that stuff hadn't been done, I made sure to do it, because it was really important for a buyer to know that they're going to need to go 20 or 30 years till they need to touch any of those items.
Yeah, and I think you've just touched on something too that's really important with that story, which is that I think people assume, and like that guy was assuming, that there's a one-to-one dollar amount for what you put into the house for what you get out in market value when you do renovations, and that's not the case at all, ever, really.
Really,
Um,
no.
and so, and that's also a problem with the homeowner Hank kind of remodel, or the remodels where you get project creep and you have to drop a bathroom off of it. So, in general, in my opinion, in my experience over 21 years doing this, you have to touch every room of that house in order to see greater than one for one back on your money. So, if you just do a kitchen remodel, you're going to get 85% return on your investment. Now, if you're going to live in a house for 10 years and it's your dream kitchen, you're going to enjoy it. Who the heck cares? Knock yourself out. But if you're doing this specifically right before sale, where you're never going to need to use that kitchen, you've got two ugly bathrooms and blue carpet, and you're going to go do a kitchen and you're going to spend 50 grand and you're only going to get 85% of that back. It doesn't make sense to do. So I think I said I have a family member who passed away, and we're having to bring their house up to snuff because it had 5 different colors of carpet and it was original to the 70s. Well, I had to sit my family down and say, we do it all or we do none of it. There's not the middle ground is the quickest way to lose money on any remodel or flip. So we have to do all of the bathrooms, the kitchen, the flooring, the paint, the light fixtures. We have to do pretty much all of it. And with that, you can see greater than 100% return on your money. You can see a profit because there's a synergistic effect of doing the whole house. But a one-off bathroom or a one-off kitchen, while you've got some real eyesores somewhere else in the house, you're going to lose money every time. So you also have to have in your thinking, when you're thinking about buying a fixer upper, that if by the time you go to sell that thing, even if it's 10 years down the road, I can't tell you the number of houses I've sold to people and gone back and they look the same 10 years later, or they have a nice kitchen and, like I said, 2 ugly bathrooms. You're not going to see any return really on that investment. And so you have to really be able to do the whole project, envision the whole project, and get it over the finish line before you sell in order to earn anything on it.
Yeah. And again, you brought up a really good point, Rich. And a big proponent of this is when someone's buying a home and they know some relatively big ticket items need to be done, and maybe it's like a kitchen, is how long is it going to take before you actually get to that kitchen? So let's really talk through that, because so many people do that at the 11th hour before they go to sell their house and they never got to enjoy it. And if you're going to be at a house, and the five fundamentals, or part of one of those is an extended timeline. Do it right away. Don't wait and try to save up and scrape together. If you can get it in credits or less down payment, get the work done right away and enjoy it, especially if it's really in rough shape.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we'll wrap this with, who do I think should buy a fixer upper, and who shouldn't. So who should buy a fixer upper? Well capitalized buyers with a lot of cash behind them so they can handle it, and so they don't mind paying contractor rates. People who are really handy tradespeople. Although I will say, to be honest, the contractor homes I've sold over the years are usually in the worst shape because they are so tired of working on houses they don't work on their own. So contractors, warning to you, you can be the worst ones in terms of buying a fixer upper and never doing the fixing, because the last thing you want to do on a Sunday is work on more houses. So be real that you want to take the boat out and have a beer on Saturday and not be working the skill saw again, contractors. But someone with some skills, close family members that actually will donate their time and skills, people who have the capital to do it, or people who are actually just biting it off as a flip and not going to live in it over time and degrade the value of the things they've put in anyway. Who do I think shouldn't buy a fixer upper? Everybody else, right? Like you, everybody else, buy a turnkey home. If you're busy, if you have young kids, if you're an entrepreneur, if you have a hectic job, if you travel for work, you need to be the kind of person who buys a house where you can put the furniture down and get on with your life. You don't have the time or the ability to deal with this kind of stuff. So even though buy a house and fix it up is good financial advice, it is pretty crappy life advice for the vast majority of buyers. And we'll get Dave's take here, but in my opinion, I think more people would be better served buying a turnkey or a decent shape home than buying a fixer upper most times.
Most times, yes, Rich. And I think the two items that I think that folks can get done right away and then can greatly improve a house: paint and carpet. Those are
Yep.
things that, like, if at a minimum, if you do those two things, and maybe it's not carpet, maybe it's some, but vinyl flooring or some laminate, or depend on where it's usually not that expensive, depending on how much you have to do or what you choose to do. But those are the things that, like, if you do those right away, it's going to make a big difference to that home. And when you move in, it's going to feel really good, when
Yeah.
before you move your furniture in, that you've repainted and you put new floor coverings in. And, it's not someone else's. It's almost like you've just really greatly cleaned the house before you took it as your own.
Yeah. And it's good quality of life upgrade. And it's something that's way easier to do before you move in.
Yes.
You can do a bathroom remodel while you live in that. You can do a kitchen remodel, but I had to refloor a house I lived in. I literally moved the whole thing out into pods in my driveway to have the thing refloored and repainted, and then had to move back in. So
Right.
that is good advice, and it's a good sort of floor level baseline if you're going to do more remodels down the road.
Right.
Agreed. All right, guys, I hope you got some value out of that. I hope you can see and what we try to do, because there's no blanket advice that's good advice in real estate, because real estate is hyper local and hyper personal. We try with this podcast more to help you frame your thinking around these things, how to look at them and how to approach them, and how to really catch the things that most people don't think about and that bite people in the backside. And that's really, this episode is a cautionary tale in remodels being longer, more expensive, and more painful than you think, and to be really real about whether it's better to let somebody else do that remodel and buy it off them and get on with your life. Hope you found this valuable. We're going to jump into some more myths over the next 4 podcasts to help you really get the signal out of the noise here when it comes to real estate, because there's so much sort of garbage advice out there, so you can make some real clear-headed decisions. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for making it to the end with us. And like, subscribe, click the little bell, do all of that. Thanks for being here, Dave. I've been Rich Curtis.
I'm Dave Miller. Thanks, Rich.
We'll see y'all on the next one.